Welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike T. Nelson, where we talk about everything here to increase your fitness performance and better body composition, all without destroying your health in a flexible system. And today I've got a great researcher, and we're talking all about collagen. Now, you may think collagen, isn't that just a horrible low-grade protein? Doesn't do anything to help muscle repair. Who gives a crap? And that's kind of what I thought as of about 5 years ago. And then I started reading some research around that time, a little bit after, from Dr. Keith Barr's lab, looking at collagen may be useful for soft tissue recovery, and that it may have lots of other benefits too. So I was at the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and the researcher here gave a great talk on a brand new study that she did regarding collagen. And it had some pretty positive results, and the dosing was quite small. So I talked to her afterwards and was able to twist her arm and get her on the podcast today. So as always, this podcast is brought to you by the Flex Diet certification. Go to flexdiet.com. and you can get on the wait list for the next time that the Flex Diet Cert will open. Right now, it looks like that's going to be January of 2022. But in the meantime, that'll put you on the free newsletter where you'll have all sorts of great content. So go to flexdiet.com, flexdiet.com, and hop on to the wait list. So today, as I mentioned, we're talking collagen with Shai, and she will be finishing up her PhD here very soon under Dr. Mike Ormsby, and we talk everything about her undergraduate work and her master's work with some of the Navy SEALs and Special Forces, everything there from potentially PTSD, some stuff related to brain impact, traumatic brain injury. I run past her my crazy ideas about the use of ketones and other things that may be beneficial for TBI. And then we get into collagen. Is it useful? What is it useful for? What are some of the mechanisms of how it may help? Dosing, timing, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think you'll really enjoy this one, and check it out. And welcome back to the Flex Diet Podcast. We have a very special guest here today, Shiloah. Did I pronounce her name wrong? Fuller?
Shiloah.
Shiloah, okay. And we're talking about collagen. And I met you after your great presentation at the International Society of Sports Nutrition back a while ago now. So welcome to the program. We appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Do you want to give us just a short little background of your experience and kind of where you're at and what you're researching? I know you're working under Dr. Mike Ormsby, correct?
I am, yeah, here at Florida State University at the Institute of Sports Science and Medicine. I originally came from San Diego, where I did my undergraduate and dual masters in exercise physiology and sports nutrition at San Diego State University. And I also completed a dietetics program there. And then I went on to work for the United States Navy as a contractor, a research physiologist for several years. And then when I was ready to get back into my doctoral work, I came over here under Mike Ormsby, and I've been researching collagen supplementation for the last 3 years. And we just concluded a large scale supplement study in older active adults. And that's when I met you at the ISSN conference back in June, when I was giving a talk on some of our findings.
Awesome. And are you at liberty to say what you worked on with the U.S. Navy, or is that still classified?
Oh, no, absolutely. Yeah, nothing classified. So I worked with the Navy EOD community. They're the ones that take care of explosive ordnance disposal.
Mhm.
And so we did a kind of like a human performance surveillance program with them that was intended to be a multi-stage program to develop a kind of surveillance from the beginning of their careers to the end to make sure that they're staying in good health, physically, mentally, and, operator readiness. And so worked with them for a few years, developing that program and assessing them. And then I went on to work with the Navy SEALs to look at how shoulder mounted rocket launchers were affecting some brain function. And that's kind of where I left off when I came out here to Florida State.
Awesome. I would imagine, and I've never obviously done this job or anything close to it, but being someone who would be potentially dismantling bombs and then retiring from that, I just think that would be one of the hardest transitions.
Yeah.
Like, would anything, I mean, because the stress and just everything that goes into that, and then to be done, I don't know, it just seems to me like nothing will ever sort of, I don't want to use the word live up to it, but the highs and lows you would have from that job and now not having that sort of variability in your life would be a weird transition.
I absolutely agree. I didn't really meet too many retired EOD. I have known a number of service members who have retired and at different stages in their careers, and they've definitely had a hard time transitioning. And I think that they do have programs for them. I think, when they're in that line of work, some see a little bit more action than others, and some are more resilient than others, and some kind of keep thriving on that stress and the adrenaline, and some kind of, want to spend more time with their families and kind of not be in danger at
Sure.
certain points in their lives. So it is a little bit more individual, but it's definitely, I think, difficult for a lot of service members to transition back to civilian life. When they're ready to do that or not ready and they have to do it. So.
Right. And you were just looking at more overall kind of welfare of them to make sure everything was, from a physiology standpoint, going well.
So for us, we're in the beginning stages of developing something for their community, kind of a surveillance. So what we were doing was we worked with a number of different labs together, and we had developed kind of like, a total body workup in a sense. They would see the physiologist, which was me and some other people. We would do stress tests. We would do max, one repetition max testing with them to see where their strength was, what their cardiovascular fitness was. We would do nutritional assessments with them. We would take salivary biomarkers of hormone responses and look at their diurnal variation in cortisol and testosterone and DHEA. Then they would see some of the sports psychologists, and they would take them through a number of different assessments for performance. And they would, take a lot of survey evaluations for combat exposure and PTSD and anxiety, depression, a lot of those types of metrics. Then they would go through functional movement screens with biomechanics. And so all of that together, we would do a workup, and we kind of designed it so we could start seeing them annually. And then we would also develop a report for them after each session so that we could give them their evaluations and then also recommendations on what to do to work on certain factors that needed some work. And then after I left that lab, they were still speaking with the community about then developing educational programs to bring into that community where they could help kind of improve fitness in all of those different areas for them, so that it wasn't so much on them individually to do that. So, the Navy SEALs have always kind of had a lot of funding for those types of programs in place. So we are trying to develop something very similar to that.
Nice. Well, that'd be very interesting. And it's nice that they have programs like that so that we can, see where everyone's at. And then you can obviously allows you to do some type of intervention, as you mentioned earlier, instead of catching everything at the end.
Yeah. And it's a good way, potentially, as we talk about sports, and a lot of investigators out there are looking at different biomarkers and metrics to look at overtraining, for instance, in athletes. just kind of developing similar kind of ways to monitor some of the warfighters also is good before you start sending them back out to combat or on deployments to make sure that they're ready. So it's pretty important to think of it in that standpoint too, because they're athletes as well, the tactical athletes. So you got to make sure that, you work them up and you get them ready for performance, just like you would for an athlete going into a season.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think there is some risk of like shoulder fired projectiles and issues on your brain in terms of, all the way from just mild concussive stuff to, full blown like TBI or traumatic brain injury?
So yeah, I think, there is a lot of that in that setting. So EOD, we did assess how many people were getting exposure and how many exposures. When I was working with the Navy SEALs, I actually worked with DivBic, which they deal a lot with the TBIs there and concussions. And so we collaborated with them with the blast exposure study, which was with the SEALs, not the EOD guys. And they were actually, I volunteered there and I talked to a lot of people, and they have a full blown program, and concussion and, different severities of TBI are a major issue in that community, all over military wide, obviously. Some of them are, from being deployed, and some of them are just that they're active duty and they get into car accidents or some other accidents happen. The other study I was working on was actually with some of the shoulder mounted rocket launchers. And so those emit a negative pressure wave, which can actually impact the brain, similar to CTE, but it's called astroglial scarring. And so that's what we're investigating in that study, to see how is that impacting these people, especially the range safety officers who are out there teaching the team guys that roll through every month how to use these guns. So they're the ones that are getting a lot of exposure. So we were looking at the differences between those guys who are there in that post for 3 years versus the team guys who come through and only do this training, as they're doing their workup. Or even we started doing the SQT guys as well, who are just basically the guys who just graduated from BUDS who haven't seen any action yet. So, but I have not seen any of those results, so I can't speak to what we found.
Sure. Looking at nutrition interventions, do you think use of a ketone ester, or I know just having everyone do a ketogenic diet presents a whole host of other issues, but something like a ketone ester as a supplement beforehand, do you think there would be any beneficial aspects to that?
It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure if they're looking at that or not. Yeah, I would be interested to see if it has protective effects. I know that, a lot of the creatine studies have seen that it can have protective effects against concussion. So I haven't seen anything like that in the literature with the ketone esters though. Have you?
Kind of. Like I did a whole, like, shameless plug, but I did a whole program for the Carrick Institute. I'm associate professor there, so they do clinical neurology. Okay. So they, a lot of the clinicians there deal with like TBI. My buddy, Dr. Jeremy Schmo here in Minnesota, and the Centers for Plasticity are probably, in my biased opinion, like some of the top centers for recovery from TBI. And so I did a program for them on use of a ketogenic diet as an adjunct for potentially post recovery. But it's interesting. I think that there is some potential benefit for it, because as you know, and for the listeners, like the two main things, if you just take a big whack to the head, is you get your energy, your body, your brain's ability to use glucose kind of goes offline. And then you start having a lot of inflammation. You could potentially have your blood-brain barrier can open up, and now you've got your brain being flooded with everything else, in addition to having a massive energy crisis at the same time. So there's some interesting studies with ketones that ketones can still supply the brain as an alternate energy source when glucose metabolism is kind of offline. And they might be having anti-inflammatory effects via HDAC and some other effects. In terms of like human subject studies, it's really limited though. There was a couple studies that came out that showed it might be promising, but again, it's one of those things where everyone's like, well, we want the perfect randomized controlled trial. And as you know, that it's just never going to happen in that area, right? You can
Right.
prophylactically maybe treat certain groups who are going to be exposed to high forces and not treat another group potentially. But you're not going to set up a randomized controlled trial where, hey, come on into the lab. We'll give you a thwack on the head. Half of you get ketones, half of you don't, right? It's not going to happen. But I think there's a fair amount of preliminary data. And for me personally, like if I'm kiteboarding and something horrible happens and I get dropped 15 feet out of the sky on my head, I actually carry ketone esters in my kiteboarding bags. I figure, well, I'll give it a go because I don't think there's much of a negative downside to it. And maybe there's an upside, but I'm not too worried about the downside. So I'll kind of hedge my bets in that direction for a while. So
That's a good way of looking at it, and definitely very smart to do. I kind of have similar thoughts about that too with some of the sports that I do. If it's not going to do any harm, all it can do is maybe do some benefit. Yeah, that's very interesting. I haven't, I'd be interested to look into that a little bit more. I was kind of interested for a while with looking at some BDNF promoters that aside from exercise in that population, because I did help those guys a little bit with some of the rehab in the gym. And I looked at kind of high intensity interval training on bikes for people that are actually able to exercise. And I think that I looked into metformin also potentially having some benefits in that arena, but I really don't know if anybody's looked at metformin and BDNF, but there are some other associated pathways that I thought that might kind of cross. And so I thought it might be a mimetic for exercise, potentially in populations that are too injured to exercise, to increase BDNF to help promote some recovery. But, so it's kind of that whole area of research is really intriguing to me.
yeah, and there's, it's mostly animal work, but I think there's some human work now showing hippocampal volume increases with moderate aerobic exercise. And I think there was a study done that showed the muscle is actually releasing BDNF. Does that sound correct?
Yeah, so I think there's two mechanisms. There's muscular release, and then we have the release in the brain.
Right.
And there's irisin involved in the muscular
Yep.
release of that. We did have an abstract at ACSM for 2020. It was a virtual one on, we went back and looked at some of the blood from Ultraman to look at long duration, high intensity exercise in BDNF, because it's really unexplored. I mean, nobody's ever looked at exercise
Right.
more than 60 minutes. And it's mainly released at, above 80% of VO2 max. So it's kind of like, you would really have to do like some HIIT work to really get those increases. And nobody really knows how long they remain elevated, because, they kind of drop back down to baseline values pretty soon after exercise. But again, it's really just been understudied in my opinion. So, but we did see some elevations with that 3-day ultra endurance race, which was really exciting. And I think when we can eventually go back to that race, I think we'll probably look at it a little bit more in depth too. So
that's
more
super
to come.
interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think supplements like lion's mane actually increase BDNF?
I haven't seen any studies with BDNF. I have seen that, I've seen, increased cognitive function potentially.
Right.
I've definitely tried it. I think it works. I'm not sure. It could be a placebo effect, me and my N of 1.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I love that whole area of research with cognitive function, and collagen actually is also being looked at in that realm too. So
Super interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. N of 1, I took a shitload of lion's mane before I did with my buddy Jeremy Schmo, I did a week of intensive, basically neurotherapy at his clinic. So I would go in, did an assessment, and then I just stayed in a hotel over on that side of the cities and did 3 sessions a day for a week. And I took a couple grams of lion's
Oh,
mane
wow.
per day. I'm like, it's pretty safe. I don't really know if it helped. I mean, the end result is it seemed to work, but who knows,
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. With a lot of those, I always question, especially if you're, obviously, if you're on any other medications, that's the only thing is I think
Yeah.
about all the vitamins that I take already, and I have no idea how they're going to interact with each other. So.
Yeah. And psilocybin can increase neuroplasticity too, but that's currently not legal. So that might be a little tricky.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot of headlines on a lot of the, psychedelics being utilized for treatment of many different things, including PTSD.
Yeah, the MDMA.
Yeah. So I haven't had a chance to really dive into that literature yet, but I definitely have that, on the to-do list for when my schedule opens up a little bit more.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I've read not all of it, but a fair amount of it. And especially in the area of mental health, it's very promising. I mean, obviously it's still pretty early, but some of the studies that, MAPS have done, Rick Doblin and those guys are pretty positive, and they're very nice, well-designed studies. Roland Griffiths has helped with that, a bunch of other people. So it's cool to see, potential solutions now that are being tested in a very rigorous scientific manner. And so far, the results are pretty darn promising. So hopefully that'll trend will continue.
Yeah, I hope so. And it seems that they've had really positive results in areas where other things have not really been very effective. So yeah, I've seen a lot of advertisements also for some of these combination therapies too, with some of the psychedelics, like low doses and cognitive behavioral therapy and some other things.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting too, is that the model they're using is combining, some type of talk therapy, with it at the same time. And, the reported change in, 1 to 2 sessions is pretty crazy. But again, as they point out, it's probably the combination of it, because not everyone who just takes the drugs by themselves has these massive changes. It's most likely the combination with the therapist, being guided under, controlled settings too.
Yes, absolutely. I know that I think the military were the ones that kind of started with the research into sensory deprivation.
Yes.
So, a lot of stuff stems from military and then is brought out into the mainstream. And so now I haven't seen it too much here on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, it's a huge booming business for the float tanks and the float sanctuaries. And I've actually tried them and they are incredible. So personally, I can attest to, body wise feeling relief of physical tension. And then also it just really does help, we're so overstimulated all the time. So there's a lot of really nice new alternative types of therapies that are coming out that seem to be pretty effective.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of flow chambers. The first one I did was actually here in Minnesota, 6 years ago now, I think. And it was in the bottom of this small practitioner's place. It was one of the early designs where it looked like you were crawling through a dryer in the wall. It was not real big. And I get in there and it took me probably almost 6 months before I did it. Cause I'm like, do I really want to be not without any stimulation and left alone with my own brain for 90 minutes? I'm like, this sounds like a horrible idea. I'm like, I should probably do it then, I guess. And I remember laying there and my first thought was, wow, I didn't realize I had this much tension in my neck and my low back, right? Because you're removing a lot of the other normal sensations you have.
Right.
And then my next thought was, after about 30 minutes, I was like, oh, this is the last appointment of the day. Are they going to leave me down here? What if they forget about me? Could I get locked in? All these other weird thoughts go through your head.
Yeah, it's interesting what happens when you're left alone with your thoughts. But I think a lot of the hallucinogenic types of therapies also kind of try to promote that too, is like digging deep and going within without all the external noise. So
Yeah, I did a combo in ayahuasca in Costa Rica this last January. And the place we went, the shaman down there, I talked to her a fair amount before and after, and she was saying that they treat a lot of, military veterans for everything from PTSD to all sorts of stuff. And it was a pretty crazy experience. And if anyone looks down that path, I would spend a lot of time making sure you know what you're doing, making sure you're going to a place that has done it a lot. I mean, my experience was great. I did a whole podcast on it, but after having that experience, I could definitely see how stuff could go bad really, really fast.
yeah. So I've actually, I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan, and
Oh yeah.
yeah. So he does the Tools for Titans, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, actually, a lot of the leading pioneers of industry do this trip with the shamans that now I've heard about. They have these trips, and they did mention that it can be very eye-opening, but really you have to make sure that the person is absolutely knows what they're doing and very reputable, because I can only imagine how it could go wrong.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I explain it to people of I think in the right hands and done well, the compounds themselves don't really present a lot of, toxicity or risk, but the environment and how you're being watched and everything that's going on. One of the things I remember during part of the ceremony was just lying there, and we went down with a group of people that we knew all of them except for two. It was only 8 people, small thing. I remember lying there going, wow, this is so cool that all these people wanted to do this experience, and I'm just here with them, and they're not a bunch of dickheads. Because I remember just thinking that, wow, if there's a bunch of people that, maybe weren't into it or didn't know what they signed up for, or, other things, I think the experience itself would have been quite different. So it was, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that would actually freak me out if I found out that I was going to do that experience with a lot of people I didn't know. I think that would be a little bit more concerning for me, or anxiety provoking, but I guess the right combination could definitely make it a good experience. Yeah, I find it intriguing. I haven't tried anything like that yet, but we'll see what comes in the future. So
yeah, I mean, the flip argument to that too is that if you're off kind of in your own experience, you probably don't even know where you're at. So I remember the guy next to me, the shaman came around, and I think he had like 1 or 2 doses, and he's just lying there on his side, like super quiet. Like a lot of other people were throwing up, crying, having just, crazy stuff going on.
oh wow.
And so the shaman comes over to him, and she's like, how you doing? And he's just like, meh. And she's like, do you want another dose? And he goes, no. And I'm like, he was just lying there so quiet. I'm like, I guess he's going through some shit too.
Yeah, he's digging deep. He's getting in there. Yeah. I can only imagine.
Yeah.
I think it takes a lot of courage, I think, to go down that road. Because that's pretty scary, intimidating.
Yeah, it definitely can be. I mean, some people listen to the episode, they got the 2 responses of, that was kind of interesting, I think I'll check into it more. And then the other half of my friends are like, hell no, I'm never doing that. That sounded like it was incredibly crazy, and I'm definitely not doing it now. I'm like, oh, that's cool. Whatever, whatever you decide. I just want people to be somewhat informed before they do anything. So
yeah, absolutely. I was so surprised when I heard that in the Ferriss podcast, that it's kind of like a regular thing for a lot of these people. But yeah, they definitely do a lot of research before they decide who to go do that with. And so it's the common theme between people. So
yeah. Cool. And transitioning to collagen, like, just give us a little background on collagen, because for the longest time, like when I was doing, a lot of my undergrad stuff, it was like, oh, this worthless protein, it doesn't do anything, and it's just doesn't have all the good essential amino acids, and it's just a crappy protein. We don't worry about it. And now it's kind of gone the other extreme, because everything in fitness goes from one extreme to the next of
Right.
collagen will do everything for you.
Well, it's funny because and I've spoken to some people and they don't even want to, they kind of said that like maybe collagen would be looked at a little bit differently if we didn't call it a protein. But I teach introduction to nutrition and I lectured on protein today. So it's absolutely a protein, and it's actually the most abundant protein in the human body. If you look at it from that standpoint, approximately 30% of our total body's protein is collagen. So we have it in all of our tissue. We have it in our skin, our bone, and our teeth. Those are made out of collagen matrix that just filled in with, some of the calcium and phosphate and some of the minerals. All of our, tendons, our ligaments, our vessels, everything has collagen in it. So, it's a large component of the extracellular matrix with elastin. And I think it gained popularity a long time ago with skin rejuvenation and anti-aging, and they did see a lot of benefits that were backed by research. And so people have been taking collagen for a long time for skin. And I think just recently it gained some popularity as something for joints. I think, going through undergrad and even grad school, everybody always talked about glucosamine and chondroitin.
Yeah.
And then the consensus was basically that, they're not really that effective. And it's funny because I've been at Florida State now studying collagen pretty much from the day I walked in the door. And that was 3 years ago. And I probably started taking collagen about 4 years ago. I have a lot of like sports related injuries that are chronic. And I heard that it could potentially help me with some of my joint pain. And I felt like it actually did. And I've gone off of it multiple times to see if the pain returns, and it does. And then, added benefits are that I get a lot of compliments on my skin and my hair because it grows like crazy.
Everybody likes that.
Yeah, exactly. So people are always commenting that they can't believe how old I am. So, I'm just like, I'll continue the use of this just for those benefits. But the fact of the matter is that, I actually saw a lot of improvements in my own functionality. And so we did do this study. We gave people collagen supplements in 3 different dosages. We had a placebo group, 10 grams a day and 20 grams a day. And they actually split those doses in half. So they're asked to take their dose in the morning and in the afternoon or evening. And it was a double-blind study the entire time. And we had participants that took it for 6 months and 9 months. And it was pretty much evenly split 50-50 between males and females, 40 to 65 years old, and recreationally active the majority of their lives with no diagnosis of any kind of osteoarthritis or any major injuries, just kind of activity related chronic pain. And we did see that, they, on some of their survey measures of activities of daily living, which would translate to physical function, that our 10 gram a day group actually saw improvements in activities of daily living. And then when we looked at people who were exercising more than the recommendation for weekly activity for healthy Americans, that we also saw reductions in pain in those same scales. So in that sense, we did see proof of concept on those measures in that study that we did. We're still analyzing and actually digging way deeper and further with some of the mechanistic stuff with the blood that we have to look at maybe what are the reasons that we're seeing those changes. So are we seeing increases in collagen production and repair, or, what are some of the potential mechanisms that, allowed us to see some of these improvements in physical function. So that's kind of the gist of it with collagen from, my research standpoint. People are looking at it for a number of different reasons. They're looking at it for body composition improvements. They're looking at it for pain, for increased function, for osteoarthritis. There's been a ton of studies on that. And I think they're starting to look at it with, look at how it could potentially improve cognitive function, for a number of different reasons. And obviously vasculature can also be improved potentially, just because if we're, improving or enhancing synthesis, then we might be able to repair some of the endothelial cells too that have collagen in them. So multiple mechanisms of action, especially when collagen is so abundant in the human body.
Very cool. And in the study, was there a difference between the 10 gram and the 20 gram dosing per day?
So with what we saw significant changes in for the 10 gram a day group, we saw like slight improvements in a 20 gram a day group, but they weren't statistically significant. So I think there might be a potential that, if we're introducing a certain amount of these bioactive peptides, which are thought to be kind of the reason that we're promoting increased synthesis, that maybe there's kind of like a blunting effect with too much in the pool, potentially, if we kind of think about it as like an amino acid pool. But, it's the glycine, the proline, and the hydroxyproline, which are the main 3 amino acid constituents of the collagen. And so when they're found in these di and tripeptide combinations, which have been shown to be actually absorbed through the digestive system into the blood intact, they're known to have bioactive effects when they're intact like that. And so it could be possible that the 20 gram a day group just has too much of it and it's just dampening the signal. But so the 10 gram a day group seems to be effective in our study. There are studies out there that have seen improvements with 15 grams a day, but we didn't test the difference between 10 and 15 and 15 and 20. So it would be interesting to see if 15 is the optimal dose.
Yeah, because you said it was split. So they're taking 5 grams in the morning and 5 grams in the evening, which at face value, and I know I'm always biased because I think of sort of a raw materials standpoint, not a cell signaling standpoint. It just seems like such a tiny amount. But I think to your point that maybe they're providing a raw material for certain things in the body, but maybe they're triggering all these other processes that they're upregulating, and maybe that's some of the benefit too. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. So there are a lot of reasons why we might be seeing these kind of changes happening. Also, speaking of raw materials, glycine is one of the main amino acids. And although it's not an essential amino acid, a lot of people do argue that it could be considered essential or conditionally essential, just because we use glycine for almost every single process in the human body. And so if you really think about it, we're probably not consuming adequate amounts and producing adequate amounts to really facilitate all of that. So the fact that we're providing a good source of glycine by consuming the collagen is just, from a raw material standpoint, just we're giving the body what it needs to be able to continue and do these processes that it needs to do, which is usually lacking, especially in our kind of Western diet where we don't have high glycine containing foods.
I know that was kind of the glycine hypothesis, which I know has been kind of gone back and forth, and I've even gone back and forth on it. Like at one point I was like, I don't know, if you just eat enough protein, you're fine. And then I'm like, well, I don't know. It doesn't really show up as much as I thought there. So now I'm like, I don't know.
And that's the crazy thing, that there have been a lot of studies that have looked at glycine in the blood with people that are consuming kind of like a high protein diet. And they looked at comparisons between meat eaters and vegetarians, and they actually found that vegetarians had higher glycine levels
Really?
in their bodies. Yeah. And then that was also the high meat, those diets were associated with metabolic disease, and with weight loss, like glycine content actually went up. So there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that you just kind of have to tie it all together. I've been swimming in this literature for a while, so I kind of have to, I'm kind of doing that right now currently. But yeah, so there's that element with the glycine, and also glycine is known to be anti-inflammatory. So that could also impact pain just by itself. And so, I have been asked if people just take glycine, will that be effective? But the thing is that, we're also seeing the benefits from the combinations of glycine with proline or hydroxyproline, but we're also seeing a lot of benefits from the proline and hydroxyproline also. There have been some radioactive labeling studies that look at, where are these amino acids going when you're consuming it? And so they are finding that, higher amounts are going into cartilage, for instance. And so areas that might need a little bit more repair than other areas. So it's a mystery. It definitely is, but it seems that we are seeing some very positive results in the literature and in our study also. So I find that it's a very exciting time to be in the collagen arena.
Yeah. And wasn't there something with glycine that was supposed to help promote sleep? I'm blanking on where I read that, or I could have completely made that up and someone on the internet told me.
Oh, I don't think I came across that.
Okay.
I haven't looked at collagen and sleep. So I think that, maybe if I put that into a search, something might come up. I mean, when I looked at glycine, just so many mechanisms that glycine is involved in. It's virtually involved in every single physiological process in the body, which is why, there is that hypothesis that,
right.
That, we do not have enough, and we definitely cannot make enough in our bodies. But I found that very interesting that the vegetarians actually had higher glycine contents, and that was the low glycine was also associated with metabolic disease. So.
And in your study, was it a particular type of collagen, or
so it's
what should people look for?
It's type 1, type 3 combo. It's made by a company out of Belgium that did obviously fund the study, but it was double blinded. So,
right.
We kind of controlled as much as possible, and we did have a placebo. And so it's very similar to, a majority of the type 1, type 3 combo collagen products that are out there. Generally, the type 2 collagen products are in capsule form. And, there's still, a lot of questions whether or not the type of collagen you're consuming actually has any kind of impact on which tissues it's directed to.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah. So that's something, unfortunately, I haven't been able to answer, but they have looked at where the collagen goes. And it does look like when you're consuming a collagen 1-3, that you are also seeing the distribution of those amino acids to connective tissue that would be predominantly in type 2, such as the cartilage. I have not seen any studies where they consumed just type 2 cartilage and looked at whether or not that was being distributed to the skin and other tissues that would be mainly type 1 collagen fibers. And type 1 and 3 are predominantly found in your skin and your ligaments and your tendons. And, type 2 is generally found in your cartilage. So there is that kind of distinction. But I don't think anybody can really answer the question, but it does look like the type 1 and 3 does also positively impact cartilage. So I don't know if the converse is true.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but type 1 and 3 are primarily in like animal hides and sort of cow bovine sources. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you can, the most popular sources are going to be bovine and porcine. So from cowhide and pig. And then some of the fish also, that's becoming pretty popular.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, the fish skins and a lot of, their collagen containing tissues. And then chicken sternum is kind of what they're using a lot for the type 2 collagen.
Type 2, yeah.
Yeah.
Is there any data you would say to mix up the kind of collagens you're taking so far, or should you just kind of just pick one and try it out? There isn't really a lot of consensus yet on the different types.
I haven't seen anything where they've really mixed the type 2. I do think that that's kind of the next step where people need to start looking at that, and then also looking at dosing timing. It does seem that there are some strategies that, people agree on that it should be taken like approximately an hour before activity, so you can get greater blood flow to those areas that are poorly vascularized, like the tendons. But that's also kind of lacking too. So I think the two areas of research that really need to be investigated a little bit more would be which tissues do the specific collagen fiber types that you're eating, are they directed to specific tissue, and would a combination be better? And then also, at when is the best time to take it? Should it, especially surrounding exercise, since exercise seems to induce the greatest benefits with collagen consumption. So I'm not sure if the literature really supports seeing it in really sedentary populations as much as it does in conjunction with like an exercise program or in an active population.
Yeah, we talk about this diastasis, and that's one thing I did, man, maybe 3.5-ish years ago. I started doing the 15 grams of collagen, 40 to 60 minutes before exercise. It seemed to help. And then I started doing it with clients, and it seemed to help them. It was based on a lot of work from Dr. Keith Barr's lab.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think, like, I always think of potential upside and downside again of, I don't know. We're probably never going to have the perfect study, because no human's going to be like, oh, please take part of my ACL and destroy it and see if it's stronger than what it was before, So we're probably always going to be somewhat, I think, limited with some of those studies. But some of the stuff he's done, which, some ex vivo models and limited, is still
the engineered
pretty
ligament,
fascinating.
Really cool stuff. I definitely, it makes complete sense to me to take it beforehand, because that is, a lot of the target tissue is really poorly vascularized. And so, the only time that you're really getting increased blood flow to those areas is during activity. And so it would make sense that you want to have ample amounts of those bioactive peptides in the blood circulating, so that, they get delivered to that tissue in higher quantities, so that we can potentially promote increased synthesis of new collagen fibers. There's something interesting that I'm going to start looking at right now is for the last component of my dissertation is the matrix metalloproteinase activity, which are the enzymes that actually degrade those collagen fibers. And depending on which types are kind of up and down regulated, it could be an indicator of either clearance of broken down unhealthy fibers to make way for the the synthesis of new fibers, or it could be just degradation of intact fibers too. So I'm really curious to see what that turnover looks like with the supplementation, whether that promotes actually like more of the clearance, because they do kind of get tangled up. Like you can think of it as a bamboo jungle, where some of the bamboo pieces are kind of broken, but because they're so tightly packed, it doesn't ever get cleared away. And then you never actually grow like a new bamboo there, because there's still one that exists there, but it's not helping kind of hold up the structure. Right. So you can kind of think of it as that's what the matrix looks like. And that's kind of essentially how like scar tissue kind of builds up.
Yeah.
And once we have that, the integrity of the tissue is never as strong. Whereas if you're able to potentially clear out some of the kind of the old and damaged fibers, then you might be able to regenerate or synthesize new fibers there. And hopefully that would lead to increased function and decreased pain. And so, that's also an interesting thing to think about. So that could be also something that's happening with timing, because those are also, they're kind of force mediated as well. So it's not just the increased blood flow, but there are other, enzymes that are activated in the presence of some of these forces. So, so it does make sense to kind of have that collagen present there for when we're kind of priming that optimal environment for enhanced synthesis, I think.
Yeah. And I believe this has been pretty much dispelled at this time, but I'm probably guilty of saying this. I know in the past that if you look at your muscle tissue, it takes around 90 days to kind of completely sort of turn over, but soft tissue, collagen, connective tissue, etc., is more like 9 months.
Yeah, it does take a while.
But I think there's some newer data, isn't it, from Luc Van Loon's lab and some other places showing that that's probably not true. I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Huh.
that?
I'll have to catch up on that because I haven't seen any of that literature out. But when I look at the literature for some of the biomarkers for collagen and bone turnover,
Yeah, they're really
and that,
slow.
yeah, really slow. And
Yeah.
so it's hard to actually pinpoint whether or not, for instance, if you're looking at CTX and P1NP, whether or not you're looking at, if you're looking at bone or collagen, because there's nothing that differentiates them. But you can kind of think of it as like time course wise. They both have kind of long half-lives. And
Sure.
so, yeah, so I don't know if they're finding that it's not 9 months, but I mean, it's definitely longer, I think, than muscle tissue, which is why it takes a longer study, and which is why we extended our study to 9 months, just because it seems that you can't really see things happening at that level, turnover level, tissue-wise, if you're not looking at it for extended periods of time. Same thing with, there's only one study that's looked at long-term collagen supplementation with bone mineral density. And there's a study out there that looked at 1 year of 5 grams a day, and they actually saw increases in bone mineral density in postmenopausal osteoporosis, osteopenia females. But nobody's been able to see any changes in bone mineral density in less time than that. And that makes sense because the literature says that you really wouldn't see changes in bone mineral density before then. So I think the connective tissue is also kind of on a similar time scale. It might be a little bit shorter, but I'm hoping to get at that with some of the other markers that we're going to look at with the matrix metalloproteinases and the TGF beta.
Yeah, because I've often wondered then if, strength training or trying to add muscle or take your pick, that is the process going to be limited then by the thing that turns over the slowest, right? So if muscle is turning over faster than soft tissue, are you limited by how fast and how strong you can reassemble the soft tissue, right? With the premise being that your body's very survival orientated and it's going to try to shut down some level of performance before you injure yourself. Granted, us silly humans can easily kind of override that at certain times, right, for sure. And then I started thinking, is it going to be limited maybe by bone, right? Because people think of bone as being very ultra stiff, but it does have some, I guess, lack of a better word, elastic properties to it without getting into the mechanics of material of it. So are maybe some of those things that like collagen maybe is beneficial to increase the turnover of those rate limiting structures?
That's a fantastic question, and something that I think is drastically overlooked. I think that, when we're talking about protein, we're always talking about muscle.
It's all muscle. It's just muscle.
Yeah. But, the thing that's overlooked is that, what connects the muscles to the bones and, the bones to the bones is that connective tissue. And then you have the bones themselves too. And, a lot of the injuries are actually in that connective tissue in most
especially
sports.
In lifters.
Yeah. And so, and I think that, kind of like a training program with like a supplementation program, like for instance, people take whey. I don't think that collagen should be something that should be used as a substitute, but as like something that should be co-ingested potentially to help with targeting benefits to the different types of tissues to support each other, right? Because if we're trying to build muscle and we're trying to produce more force and all these things, if we're only focusing on the contractile fibers and, increasing the lean muscle size, then, we're kind of neglecting to look at what are all the supporting tissues around the entire body that are going to facilitate those movements and, all that force production. So, I think it's interesting that, we've kind of neglected to really look at the other tissues aside from muscle, skeletal muscle. And I think that it's something that we need to kind of look at. So I know they've done some proteomic studies with collagen supplementation, and they have seen that some of the supporting structures are really, the protein synthesis is upregulated with collagen consumption. And so I think that there needs to be a differentiation when we're looking at these kind of these benefits or these gains in we need to separate out the tissue that we're specifically targeting. And I think we need to look at it as like a whole system kind of, working together rather than just always kind of targeting like the skeletal muscle itself. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've had clients do for many years now, especially if they're really kind of pushing the envelope, is if they're training in the morning, 1 scoop of whey and 15 grams of collagen like an hour before. If whey bothers their stomach, they'll drop to, 6 to 12 grams of just an essential amino acid and a collagen. And it's all anecdotal, so you can't really compare it, but it seems like it's been beneficial. And then if they have some type of acute injury that they're cleared from their physical therapist so they can start very light training, I'll have them do 1 session in the morning, take that an hour before, and then before their other session in the afternoon, do the same thing again. Because I think the myth is from Keith Barr's lab, but doesn't how long the sort of synthetic response stays active is, what was it, like 6 to 8 hours or something? So in theory, you could maybe do it twice per day to try to get more benefit of remodeling.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there have been a couple of studies out there with some of the tendinopathy research that have done bi-daily rehabilitative exercise, and they're not like huge. They're not like a full-blown workout. They're just kind of like go through your exercises twice a day. Yeah, and then they did instruct them to take the collagen beforehand, and they did see massive benefits in return to play, decreased time to play. All of those things. One thing I wanted to mention though, and that, I think we don't want to neglect, is that we want to make sure that we have some kind of fresh source of vitamin C when we do.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, because, especially if we've been fasted all night and then we just have some whey and stuff like that, we might not have enough to really promote that hydroxylation of the proline. And that hydroxyproline is one of the, 1/3 of the major constituents of that collagen. And I think it was Shaw, one of the studies, they looked at the gummies with the vitamin C. They found out that, after an overnight fast, if they didn't have vitamin C with the collagen, that they weren't seeing the same effects. So really interesting, because we kind of take for granted that we think that we just have ample amounts of vitamin C just, circulating throughout, and that we wouldn't have to consume it with it. But it looks like a supplement that would have vitamin C and some whey and some collagen would probably kind of be one of those optimal types of pre-workout, especially for rehabilitative stuff, kind of products out there. But I haven't seen anything like it yet. So
I don't understand that, because I promoted this to a couple of supplement companies 3 years ago. And I'm like, this is a no-brainer. Like, look at this research, collagen, vitamin C, add a few other things for your pre-workout, some essential amino acids, like, you're good to go. Like, you can add stims, not add stims, whatever, like
creatine, caffeine, whatever. And
and this,
perfect.
this would appeal to probably the biggest population, older people that are looking to get back into the gym, or, athletes that are training really hard. Like, the story is pretty easy to sell. We have some preliminary data on it. I mean, better than I do that half supplements have no data on it anyway. So, and they'll still sell it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so grateful for the companies that are actually out there getting the research done. They're investing in their products, and they're spending a lot of money for this research. And, hopefully people recognize that and will kind of stick to the companies that are, making that investment. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I 100% agree that I do not know. It's a no-brainer to me also. I don't know why it doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. So my poor man's cheap version, if clients are really on a budget, is just buy the bulk essential amino acids. They don't smell them because they smell like cat piss. They're horrible tasting. They foam like crazy. And then buy powdered lime juice in a powdered form, and then add that with your 15 grams of collagen. So that's my poor man's version.
Nice. Very nice. Yeah. I've never tried the powdered lime powder, but I know that just like powdered vitamin C is dirt cheap.
Yeah. Yeah. The downside is that you don't need a lot. And if you put too much in, you're going to be in the bathroom, not doing your training. So watch the amount.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. That's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, the great thing about, I don't know, I haven't really played around with the essential amino acids, but the great thing about collagen versus whey is that collagen dissolves in pretty much anything. Like,
oh yeah.
whey. I've
Super
been trying
easy.
to make caffeine coffee drinks with whey my entire, adult life, and it always be nature's. It's always a hassle cooking with it. Collagen, you just throw it in some coffee. It's relatively tasteless and odorless, and it doesn't clump or anything. So it's super easy to work with. So yeah, just kind of figuring out what you can put the actual, essential amino acids in that won't have that effect. Then, you have the perfect product.
Yeah, well, if any supplement people are listening, send me my percentage.
Yeah,
You know where to
likewise.
find you. So if they need research on it, we have a researcher here. So yeah. What, as a follow-up, kind of a last question here as we wrap up, for someone listening for general health, let's say, okay, I believe you crazy people, and I'll take it before training, but for general health purposes, is there a recommended amount of collagen per day? And then the follow-up is, can they get that from, real food? And if so, do they need to start eating cow tails and noses and stuff, or what do they do?
Oh, yeah, good questions. I think the literature supports benefits anywhere from 5 to 15 grams a day, as low as 5. It just sometimes it might take a little bit longer for you to see some kind of differences, depending on what your goal is with it too, whether it's pain, skin, bone, injury, recovery. But I think as little as 5, in our study, we saw, 5 grams twice a day was beneficial for, activities of daily living and pain. And so I would definitely say that would be the recommendation as of right now. And I think you can dip down as low as 5 a day. And then there is a difference between the hydrolyzed collagen and actually eating it in its native collagen form. And they have looked at studies and seen that, it doesn't have the same effects potentially. A lot of the effects that we're seeing from the hydrolyzed collagen is because of those bioactive peptides. So those di and tripeptides of the glycine, proline, hydroxyproline. And so you're not necessarily going to have those intact peptides circulating in the bloodstream after eating something like a bone broth or a gelatin even, just because it's not formulated that way. I mean, you'll definitely have those amino acids available for, whatever processes you need, like we talked about with glycine, us not having enough glycine present to potentially support a lot of its functions. But it seems that the hydrolyzed collagen has the added benefits of having those peptides already intact. And those actually, we have peptide transporters, and then we have individual amino acid transporters in the gut. And so we have preferential absorption of those intact peptides. So they potentially get into the bloodstream faster, even though nobody really knows how they get into the bloodstream intact because there don't seem to be any transporters. So that's another kind of area of study right now, is that are they being kind of, brought out of the intestine, like in vesicles or by some different modes of transport. But regardless, they are seeing that these intact peptides are prevalent in the circulation after consumption of hydrolyzed collagen up to 2 hours post, basically peaking. And so that seems to be a big difference. And that could potentially be a big difference in some of the effects that you would see between eating something that is like a bone broth or a gelatin based food versus having something that's been kind of formulated and broken down into those constituents. So long-winded answer. I apologize.
No, that's good. Appreciate it.
But yeah, so it seems that the hydrolyzed protein, collagen proteins or peptides are a little bit more beneficial or superior to native collagen products just for those reasons. But I think eating the native collagen is going to be better than not having a good source of it in your diet, period. Because that is kind of what our cavemen ancestors were eating. And so, I don't know if they had increased, healing or not, because we haven't been able to study them, obviously. But so that's another question there. So
yeah, no, that's good, because I'm all for eating real food. I think that should be the basis of your diet. But at the same point, sometimes with supplements and modern technology doesn't make it evil. I mean, look at creatine, the amount of, steaks you need to eat to get 5 grams of creatine a day. good luck,
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah, we're able to, produce things in concentrated amounts that are, therapeutic. And so, dose makes the poison or the medicine. And so we're able to make medicines out of these foods that normally wouldn't have the benefits that they do in their native form. So I definitely think that we should take advantage of the ones that we have been able to, use with science. It's just like everything else, all the other developments. We're living longer, we're getting stronger, and it's all thanks to a lot of the research that we've been doing. So
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. What's next for you? Is Dr. Ormsey going to let you out of there at any time soon, or?
yeah, I'm actually in the job
I just like
hunting
giving him a bad
process.
time, so it's all my fault. You're doing great.
No, he's great. He's been wonderful. Yeah. I don't know. The world is my oyster. So I'm currently kind of exploring job opportunities since I am about to head on out of here and
Nice.
be on my own again. So we'll see. Hopefully supplement research or maybe some aerospace physiology with the military or NASA or something along those lines. So or maybe I can kind of do a little bit of both. So we'll see.
Yeah, that'll be maybe a topic for another time, because I took when I did my master's, there was a guy who started the exercise phys program at Michigan Tech who taught a class on aerospace physiology. He was one of the physiologists from the US and worked with the Russian cosmonauts for many years, worked with NASA. And to me, it's just fascinating because it's like all the stuff we do for exercise and strength training, it's like the inverse, like bizarro world. It's like the opposite.
No,
right?
you're
You just
absolutely
throw
right.
someone in microgravity and everything just goes to shit.
Yeah. I had to explain to my 9-year-old daughter when I was telling her that I was looking at, working with astronauts, that I have to figure out how to not let them turn into mush, basically.
Yeah.
So.
And don't volunteer for one of those. God, didn't they do a 90-day bed rest study, I think, like a couple of years ago?
Yes.
Oh.
When they were looking at the fiber type changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
And there were so many people in my muscle physiology class that were like, I would totally do that. And I was just like,
Yeah, for one day.
No way, not for any amount of money would I ever be able to do that. So
no. And
yeah.
I think one of the studies, I don't know if it was that study, they actually had a crane that lifted them to the bathroom. So it's not even like you're getting up to go to the bathroom. You're trying to stay laying down, and it's a slight, increased downhill slant a little bit too on top of it. And yeah, you couldn't pay me enough to be in one of those
surprised
studies.
that they didn't just insert catheters into all the orifices just to like eliminate any need for movement. But I never actually read into the details of those studies enough to actually think about the bathroom. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure they had a Foley catheter for the urine. The other one might be a little trickier, but yeah. I agree.
Agree. Definitely. But yeah, good, interesting topic for another day. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be found, where would people find you, or other potential employers may want to hunt you down? Where would they go?
That is a very good question. So
maybe you don't want to be found, so that's okay too.
I know I do want to be found. I do have an Instagram account. You can find me under Shiloah Kwiatkowski. I know it's a little bit difficult to spell. So, or at the ISSM FSU website, or now we just changed our department name to the Department of Nutrition and Integrative Physiology at Florida State University. So my contact information is all up there if you can't find me on social media.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time today and sharing all of your knowledge. It was super interesting, and I'm always grateful to pick your brain, especially with all the stuff on collagen. And it's great to hear from someone who spent over 3 years looking at it on a day-by-day basis too. So it's thank you so much for sharing all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for letting me give you my spiel and talk your ear off about collagen.
No, it's good, because I think it's one of those areas that's just going to become more and more popular. And as you know, in fitness, when something becomes more popular, there's just a whole bunch of crap that's not even remotely true.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to kind of figure it out myself, but anecdotally, I didn't mention this previously, but we did once we unblinded the study, the supplement company did send a year's supply to any of the participants who were interested. And so a lot of them were from track clubs and triathlon clubs around Tallahassee. And so I did give a talk virtually to them and to give them the findings and kind of giving them a PowerPoint about the background of, collagen, so they knew what they were supplementing with. And anecdotally, I had so many people give me so much positive feedback about how they didn't see any changes. They were like, oh, I must be in the placebo group. And then obviously there's, the potential for placebo effect here. But when they were sent the actual product, they were like, I saw so many improvements. All my pain dissipated after about 3 to 6 months, kind of consistent with all the literature, and they weren't really aware of the literature. So it's really funny because I personally, I've gone off and on of, trying it, and I've realized that I do see a difference when I do take it for a little while again. And it was really nice to see that people felt really positive about, their experience with it. Whereas a lot of things that you test generally, people are really skeptical, or people are just kind of, mixed on their feelings of it. But especially the fact that people in the placebo group got an opportunity to take the product afterwards and had really good feedback. It was kind of just really positive, just positive feedback for me to continue kind of looking into this, because I feel like a sense of efficacy. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's my anecdotal thoughts too. I mean, I've tried it off and on for 4.5 years now. I remember my buddy Cal Dietz coming up to me, probably 6 years ago now, walked into his office. He's like, hey, and they're like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm a new supplement for some of my athletes. I'm like, what? He's like, gelatin. I'm like, gelatin? What the hell are you talking about? He's like, oh, it's for their joints. I'm like, huh? This is like a long time ago. And I'm like, oh, yeah. He was kind of on the right track, just a little off, but he was going in the right direction before anyone else was really thinking of it.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. Like I remember, back in I think the 90s when I was in middle school, my dad was taking like shark cartilage and things like that.
I remember that.
Yeah. So, I mean, same concept, and he was a tennis player and he was always struggling with like kind of joint issues. And so, he was always kind of trying out new things, always just new supplements, trying to help him improve his performance and his fitness level and stuff. So, yeah, it's been an interesting road, but I'm glad that there's a little bit of traction and, it's gaining popularity. And, I think people are pretty happy when they start taking it. So I figure, why not figure out why it works?
Yeah.
And see, exactly what is it doing? So, I'm really, hoping that we see something novel in some of the blood that we're going to analyze over the next couple of months. And I'm excited to share the findings once, I have those.
Yeah, I think that'll be super interesting, especially if you find that it's like we talked about, it's not just a raw material, but it's setting off a bunch of these other processes that are going on. Just even, it's like most research, right? You think you've got something sort of figured out, and then you've got 100 more questions because of it. So
oh yeah, absolutely. And that's what I always say. I'm like, you see one thing, either you don't see an effect or you do, and then that just opens up an entire Pandora's box for like a whole new line of research. So
yeah, because people are like, oh, you finished your PhD, you must have solved all the questions you had. I have way more questions now than like the 7 years before I even started it,
Yeah. And I think that's the conundrum with like getting a PhD. It's, kind of like the more you learn, the more you know that you don't know anything. So
yeah, I remember telling Cal this once. I'm like, the more I know, I don't know anything. And pretty soon I'll just know nothing.
I say something very similar to people all the time. It's so frustrating. So I'm like, man, I study this so much, and just the more I study it, the more I know that I just don't know anything.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything today. We really appreciate it. And yeah, if you have any updates, we'd love to have you back on whenever.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you so much to Shai for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate all of her time. It was awesome to talk to her again. Such a wealth of knowledge. So if you have questions for her, she gave her contact information. So make sure to hit her up there. And thank you for listening to the podcast. Really appreciate it. If you could do me a favor and subscribe to the podcast via whatever app you are using, that helps us out a lot. If you can leave us a review, however many stars you feel is appropriate, works for me. If you have constructive feedback, I'm down for that too. So anything and everything helps us make this a better program to help you reach your goals. So thank you so much. You can enroll and get information on the Flex Diet certification. Go to flexdiet.com, flexdiet.com. Again, it'll open January 2022. And in the meantime, you can still get on the wait list. It'll put you on the daily newsletter. So go to flexdiet.com. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.